Thank you and good morning. This is truly a very important tradition. When I look at those 9 decades, I realize that I was around for 4 of them. So I don't know what you can make of that, but it's true. The first host breakfast, which I assume there may be a few in the audience, in 1975 that I attended, I really didn't respond to the invitation soon enough. And the guy said, "What's this host breakfast stuff?" I was in a more iconoclastic mood at that point in my life. So because I delayed the host breakfast, got a substitute speaker, and that was President Gerald Ford. But then when he walked across the Capitol Park, Squeaky Fromme took a shot at him. Luckily, she missed. So you remember that, right? Few people remember that, anyway. Just a few factoids to put this all in perspective. So when you delay, other people take your place. So that's why you got to show up. And that's what I've been doing, longer than anybody else. And now nobody can beat that record unless they get rid of term limits. And I will say, since I've had the experience of being in the same office, for 14 years, separated by a 28-year gap. And that does give me an occasion when I'm sitting in the same room. I have a picture of my father when he was in the same office, exact same office, visiting when Jack Kennedy came in to solicit his endorsement in 1959 for the 1960 election. Anyway, it's a very enlightening to be able to remember how the world looked to me, how the state, the budget, the legislature, life, and then look at it 41 years later. And there are differences. And while youth has a zest and an enthusiasm and a risk-taking, I have to conclude at this point, there's no substitute for experience. And it's true in very concrete ways. After you've had 1,000 discussions with legislators, with lobbyists, with staff members, over decades, there are things that emerge, and from mistakes or successes, you can put together a good, and when I say put together more unconsciously and intuitively, a sense of the way things work and the way things break down. And that's very helpful when you're trying to deal with government in our very fragmented society. It's not that easy. The word dysfunctional easily comes to mind as we look east to Washington, big issues that are just left unattended to because of political differences, partisan differences that have never got so sharp. So I am glad to say that in California we've been able to overcome some of that, and through some decision-making that has involved both parties, we've been able to tackle some of the big issues. And one of the big issues, not all that exciting, but fundamental, is the state budget. No matter what you do, you can pass regulations and not cost the taxpayer, but just impose it on people. But the budget, aside from regulation and other forms of law, is very, very fundamental. And we have a very different situation. And this is something you need to look at the longer historical flow here. Back 40 years ago, the income tax was about 1/3 of the state budget. And the property tax was a very significant part of county government, social welfare, law enforcement, and the public school system. After Proposition 13, the state played a bigger role. And that bigger role was financed to a very significant degree by the income tax. So today, from being 1/3 of the general fund budget, the income tax is about 70%. And of the 70%, 1.5% derives, over 50% of the income tax derives from the top 1%. Now, there's a lot of reasons why. Well, there's two reasons why that is. One, it's fair. That's where more of the money is. But secondly, if you have to go to the people and ask them to tax, the best tax is the one where 99% of the voters don't pay it. So that's what 1% means. It means that 99% don't pay it. And so they're a very amenable constituency for that kind of taxation. Now, there's a downside to all this. These folk at the top have a lot of capital gains. And it's good they should share that with the state, and many of them do now, forcefully, coercively, I might say. But it's very volatile, and it's not reliable. And people never quite get it. It's a hard thought. People think, oh, is there going to be a recession? Somebody actually asked me that. Do you think there'll be a recession? What do you mean, do you think there'll be? There always are recessions. In fact, I recall being in St. Ignatius High School senior year, I took an economics course because I wanted to avoid taking a math course. And I remember the priest very well, Father John Clark. He went to the blackboard and he did a big zig, or a line up and a line down, and then a line up and a line down. He said, you know what that is? That's the business cycle. Now, economists have been working to flatten it out, but they haven't yet succeeded. Well, that was 1955. And the zig and the zag has been going on since World War II 10 times in California. There have been 10 recessions. Now, when you have a recession, thank goodness there are recoveries. And these recoveries take various amounts of time. Because as soon as you're finished with the recovery, you get to have another recession. That's the way it works. So we've had 10 of them. The longest is 10 years. Only one lasted 10 years. One lasted 8 years. The average is 5 years. We're now midway past the 7th year of our recovery. Now, as my father told me, timing is everything. And I timed my return to Sacramento to begin the business cycle upward, and I've timed my exit for its downward cycle again. So if I appear to be successful, it's what Father Clark said. It's that business cycle they haven't figured out how to smooth and flatten. So there it is. So we've got to get ready. Now, this is the problem. Our revenue system, it's so up and down, and it has a peculiar impact that right before the downturn, the money's flowing in. It's been going on for 7, 8 years. Everybody feels, boy, we got so much money, let's spend it. Well, Gray Davis did that. Arnold Schwarzenegger did that. Of course, the voters then rewarded them with popularity ratings below 30%. I'm going to try to avoid that if I can. But so here's what happened. To try to not do this, at the most exuberant time in the spending cycle, you have to say no. And it just doesn't feel right. But if you don't do that, you start embarking on new programs that are fixed and are very hard to remove at the very moment when the revenue is supposed to go away. Now, how much revenue? I've asked the Department of Finance to estimate what would a moderate recession look like? What would it do to the revenue? And they came back, not a big recession, just a regular one, about a $55 billion loss in revenue over 3 years. $55 billion. General fund's about 120. 3 years, 17, $18 billion a year. That's a lot of money not to have. And it just shows up. And it comes very quickly. Now, Moody's pointed out there's a problem with California's budget system. Number one, the revenues are volatile. They go up and down. And they don't give you notice, by the way. Nobody predicts a recession. I don't know if you knew that. So all your budget predictions are based on curves upward. And they say, well, they just don't do that. That would be a real downer if someone said, oh, by the way, December 15th the recession starts. No, they don't tell you that. You just have to be surprised. Now, we have a lot of spending rigidities. We are not an island here. We are embedded, entangled, ensnared in partnership, whatever word you want to say, with the federal government. Example, in Medi-Cal, we spend $25 billion of state money. Federal government gives us $70 billion. And they make all the rules. So if you want to cut, and they don't want you to, you can't. And oftentimes they don't. So you've got a locked-in, fixed commitment that keeps going up with inflation, and you can't do much about it. So that's called rigidity, spending constraint. Then you got a lot of fixed costs. We have things you just got to pay. You got pension liabilities. You have prisons and 24-hour institutions to run. You have all sorts of things you got to do. You have the highway patrol. You have to have fish and game. You don't cut those things. And then you have, at least we have now, we never did before, a small rainy day fund. Now, I'm trying to build that up. Other people say, well, how can you put money in a rainy day fund when there's all this need? Well, I'll tell you why. Because there'll be all that need next year and the year after and 10 years from now. And if you don't have a rainy day fund, you're going to cut all those programs. And that's exactly what happens. When the budget went into deficit by $60 billion, the state cut the courts, cut higher ed, cut child care, cut a lot of things. All the things that weren't protected either by the Constitution or by the entanglement with the federal government. So that's why Moody's said California has the worst, or the 19th worst of 20 top states in its ability to deal with financial instability or the ebbs and flows of the business cycle. That's why I say managing the budget is like riding a tiger, and you got to hang on. And it's not that easy, because the mood will now say, with all this money, why don't we embark upon all these needs? And I promise you, no matter how much we spend, not only will there be more needs, but the spending will be able to fund even more and deeper examinations into needs we don't even know about yet. But after we've spent that additional money, we'll have more experts and more insight and more understanding, and therefore actually will be shorter of money no matter how much we spend. Think about that. So you're really chasing, it's like chasing some kind of a comet. All right, now, so that's just the constraint. So far, so good. We've got, several billion in the rainy day fund. We're carefully balanced in the budget, and we were much worse than that. But again, we ought to look, these are not just politician stuff. It's the objective business cycle that moves no matter what we do. All we can do is adjust, not ignore. But going forward, there's still a lot of things that isn't just the budget. We have to do things. And in education and in crime and punishment, California has been a leader. In education, alone among the states, we're directing money based on the identification of greater need. For example, non-English speaking at home, low income, or the presence of foster care kids. We direct 20% of our educational spending based on those criteria, not some kind of complicated state regulatory program. No, these are formulas that are based on the law, and the money shows up based on these objective factors. That's called the local control funding formula. The other aspect of this is local control. And over the last couple of years, we've returned more authority, significant authority, to local schools. And this is not a given. This is a contested idea. Some people want the state to precisely specify and mandate what teachers are supposed to do in every classroom. Now, we're already doing that to a tremendous extent. We have volumes and volumes of the state education code. It's there. But we have now carved out more autonomy for local schools, for teachers, principals, and local school districts. And the point of that is very simple. What our main power in Sacramento is we write a law, and then we write a regulation, and then we send an email. And then we get an email back. And then we send another email. And then we have a hearing. Then the whole process goes over again. Then we write another law, put out another regulation, and allow people to send out new emails. That's because here in the bunker, this is kind of a bunker, this building, we have to issue commands to direct, if we attempt to do that, the behavior of over 300,000 teachers. And they're supposed to shape the lives of 6 million students. So yes, we set goals, we set some measurable objectives, but we need some humility. It's hard for the teacher when she or he shuts the door to achieve certain goals. It's hard for the principal who's down the hall. It's hard for the superintendent of the local school district. Well, it's even harder for the State Board of Education or the legislature or the governor. So we have to understand as best we can what can the teacher do, what can the school district do, what can the state board or the state superintendent do. So that's the whole idea of what we're embarking on. And it's very different than other states. Other states are more prescriptive. The federal government, until very recently, was embarked upon more and more emails to the state. And I know, because I get them, and I answer them. So we're trying to get a little autonomy in the whole school system. Then, in the area of crime, we did realign a number of crimes. They put more authority at the local court and in local authorities, sheriffs, DAs, police, prosecutors, mental health, drug treatment programs. And that's been going on. And I think after several years, it's been, I think it's been reasonably successful. And by the way, we had to do that because we had to reduce our prison population. Justice Kennedy, by the way, he ordered us. The only time in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court they ever told a state, your population in your prisons cannot exceed 137.5% of defined capacity. Now that's an email for you. But it's an email with a 5-4 vote that says, you have no choice. Get on with it. So we did that through realignment. But secondly, there's an initiative that'll be on the ballot, and we're going to find out soon if we qualified for this November ballot, and I hope we will, that will introduce parole for the first time since 1977 for nonviolent prisoners. It will also enable the Department of Corrections to fashion a system of incentives based on good time, educational achievement, or rehabilitative achievements. And it will also change the juvenile law such that juveniles will be sent to adult court only when a juvenile judge, after hearing, decides that's the appropriate thing to do. I think it's pretty reasonable. It deals with justice, deals with rehabilitation, and it partially corrects a law that I had something to do with. Now, one of the beauties of being in government over a 42-year period, you get to make mistakes that you then can correct. And I will tell you that government best solves problems that it first creates. Now, if it's a real problem in the world, it's much harder. So we had, for 60 years, from 1917 to 1977, a system of indeterminate sentence whereby people were sent to prison for a very long range of time, and they got out when a parole board said they were ready. Now, that wasn't a perfect system. There were disparities, mistakes made. But then we shifted to a fixed system, and that fixed system then helped propel. We shifted from a parole board, which quietly looks at each case, to the legislature. And the legislature got so excited with its criminal lawmaking power that it enacted thousands of new criminal laws, thousands. And it enacted, well, right now we have 5,100 separate crimes, criminal provisions. And we have 400 enhancements that can take those crimes and increase dramatically whatever the sentence was. So that is a system that is hard to get at. But instead of trying to cut that Gordian knot, at the front door, I said, well, at the back end, after people have been in prison for a period of time, let's let the parole board, in the case of nonviolent prisoners, nonviolent offenses that they're in for, let them have a hand at parole. So that's on the ballot, and I hope you'll take a look at it. It's well thought out, and it's reasonable, because unlike some measures, it's not fixed. It's not absolute. You know, you can say, okay, this is a felony, we're making it a misdemeanor. There's no judgment in that case, other than the initial judgment. But when it comes to giving someone parole or an educational or rehabilitative credit, that's based on a human judgment of another human being. And it's that flexibility and that discretion that adds wisdom to a system instead of automatic pilot, mechanistic rigidity. And I signed the fixed determinant law because I thought things were too uncertain and we need clear, certain punishment. What I didn't take into account was that if you tell someone on day of sentencing you have 5, 10, 15, or 50, or 60 years, and you can't do anything to change that, you do take away incentive, and you do create more violence in prison, and you do create more rule breaking. So now we have a system where you can actually earn years off your sentence. You can earn it by good behavior, by really changing your life. So it's taking people who have absolutely no power in their life and giving them power through their own will and transformation to turn their life around, stay out of gangs, stay out of contraband, stay out of prison narcotics and illegal activities, and they can be rewarded. So that's, I think, very helpful. Two other things, and then I'm going to stop. Besides crime and punishment, and besides education, and besides running a budget that is steady over time and doesn't plunge us into these deep budget cuts that so disrupt our public service, we do have to build for the future. And it's good, you know, I like to save money, but there are times when you want to spend money. Building the University of California, of which my father built 3 branches when he was governor, that's building for the future. Building the BART system, carries hundreds of thousands of people a day. That's building for the future. And there's always skeptics. When the Panama Canal was proposed, people said it can't be done. It took a couple of decades, but there it is. It was a real feat. And even the Golden Gate Bridge, people criticized that. So, yeah, I'm talking about the high-speed rail, if you had any doubts. And by the way, there's another fixed cost. We need infrastructure investment, several billion. Our roads need repair, and we're going to have to get more money for that. We don't get it this year, but we'll get it soon. We have to get it. Otherwise, we just let our asset run down. I can tell you, by the way, I have a personal example. The governor's mansion, which is just a few blocks from here, my father lived there for 8 years with my sister and my mother, and I used to visit it. It was a pretty nice place. I always knew it was. And then the Reagans moved in, and they were for Los Angeles, so they didn't know about Victorian houses. They thought they were fire traps. But every Victorian house is a fire trap, let's face it. That's why they have fire escapes on the old mansion. They used to have a rope when my father moved in, and his innovation was to put in fire escapes. So anyway, they moved out pretty quickly, and I decided to move back. And the house had really been neglected for 40 years. It took the pipes, the electricity, the plaster, the paint, the windows. It needed a lot of work. And, you know, it cost some money, several million. But now the good news is that when Ronald Reagan was governor, he had that kitchen cabinet, you know, Henry Salvatore and Holmes Tuttle and all those people. Well, I don't know, he had a bunch of guys. So they helped pay for a new mansion. That was the new mansion that I didn't move into because I said it was the Taj Mahal. And just to show you the power of stigma, George Dumajian didn't move in either. So finally they sold it, and they put the money in a fund, and lo and behold, when it came time to fix the mansion, we're using Ronald Reagan's political donors, not the taxpayers. So there it is, the continuity. 5 decades of tradition and innovation. So that's all. Well, there's the other things. Besides the high-speed rail, that's a problem. And by the way, as I get older, I'm looking forward to sitting in the rail car with a bourbon and rocks, looking at my iPhone. That's a lot more pleasant than after I leave the governorship, hunched over the wheel with my blood pressure rising. I think this is a senior issue that we should respond to. So the other thing, of course, is these Delta tunnels, and I know you may have a lot of people not talking about that, and this is a real touch-and-go kind of thing. This is an issue that I think even Earl Warren was thinking about, and Goodwin Knight and my father. They knew that you can't run water through the Delta waters, the slough there, without problems. And there are problems. These big pumps suck the fish out. The water, which is fresh, running through this, goes from the Sacramento River through the Delta into the aqueduct of the California Water Plan. If the old dirt levees fail, and they're 100 years old, and they're going to fail either through earthquake or through rising sea level, which is predicted to be 6 feet by the end of the century in some pretty credible predictions. And if that water, by the way, gets salt intrusion, you can't drink it. Now, you might say, well, that's just the people in LA. No, 80% of the people in Livermore get their water from that source. 40% of Santa Clara, Silicon Valley. And everybody who thinks that's our engine of economic growth, what happens if their water is cut off with 24 hours notice? That's not going to be good for investment. So this is another thing you can't do without it. A lot of people don't want it. A lot of people don't know what the hell it is. Hell, I'm just figuring it out myself. It's taken me 40 years. But everything I can tell, it's really important. So there it is. You got to build for the future. You have to manage a budget with a sense of tomorrow, not being naive about the way the business economy works. And you got to realize you can't do it all from the bunker or from the governor's mansion. Thank you very much.